for joining us for our webinar series here. Appreciate you taking time off on this beautiful Friday to jump on with us. So we promise not to keep you for too long, but yeah, we're gonna have a good time going through this fantastic subject that we've kind of been talking about for a little bit. Just to do a little housekeeping at the very beginning, we have a couple of rules. Ones I think will be good for us. So we encourage everybody to keep your cameras on. We love to see everybody's face. We encourage you to mute your mics until we pause to ask questions. We have a couple of times throughout our webinar today we'll be talking. And we encourage you to say hi, where you're from, and what's your interest in today's subject. So we can all sort of get to know each other and see where everybody's at with their internal branding. While you all do that, I'll introduce who we have on the call today. So we have Nick Rogacki, our creative director here at the agency. Go ahead and wave, Nick. And we got Peter Anania, our managing partner. And we have me, Dustin Bailey, our account executive and fellow partner here at the agency. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about resilience, growth, and the role of internal branding. First, we're going to define it, then remind people why why it's so important and why it's such a great topic for us to go over today. Then we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of different scenarios where it plays a key role. Then we're going to talk about some key considerations for you to take home and mull over as you think about your own internal branding for your organization. And then, of course, at the end of our program, we'll talk we'll have a Q&A to go over any other things that we haven't quite touched upon today. So that is our roadmap. I need to fix, actually, there we go. Sorry, I had to fix my camera. Peter, actually, can you go back to the last slide? Thank you. So, just to sort of go from the very beginning, right? Well, what do we mean by internal branding? We've thrown that around a lot. We've had great conversations with some people about it, and to really give you a better idea, what is internal branding, how we're defining it today, and how we're going to be talking about it is, it's your branding, it's your perception of your brand. We're looking internally, it's the perception, simply put, what you have within your organization itself. So from your highest executive to your employees, it's the perception that you have in-house.
Yeah, and what makes it really important, I think is kind of intuitive for most people on this call, right? We've all worked at places that had bad internal branding, whether that's the terminology we used to articulate it, or whether it was just a feeling we had, oftentimes a feeling that caused us to leave places like that. Internal branding is something that we've all, I think, deal with or dealt with in an intimate way. It's more than just working at a place with a bad culture, right? Internal branding is something that you see in kind of every aspect of the organization. So company culture, the values, the way that people treat one another, the way that they treat their job, but also what the internal branding affects your brand health, right? The perception of your brand starts from the inside and goes outwards. People start to get a sense of what company you are based on the people that they're dealing with. So whether that's customer service or whether that's interactions that they have on the phone or in person at events, what your internal culture and internal brand feels like really informs your external branding. And then it also really affects products and profits. We'll get into all this more in a second. But the quality of the products you put out there, the money you make or spend because you've got good or bad internal branding, it makes a huge difference. And I think that when people talk about branding, they think logos. And we, particularly since as an agency, we specialize a lot in branding and rebranding, we feel like people don't talk enough about internal branding or understand it enough. So what we've decided to do is break it down into a couple of scenarios. And we chose 3 scenarios that really make sense based on the kind of client requests and the kind of client problems we find ourselves solving a lot lately. It also kind of helps to give us some concrete examples of where internal branding actually makes a difference. So we're going to jump to our first scenario for a second. And I promise you're not going to have to listen to me talk over and over. We'll stop for Q&A in a minute. But so the first scenario that we have is when you just need a better product, right? So Peter's losing track. There we go.
There we go.
So when you're looking for a better product, and we're talking about this in terms of both kind of products, services, sales, etc. How does internal branding help you with that? Because that's a question that we deal with a lot. And really, it starts with getting your vision and mission right. To explain it for the people in the back or newbies as we talk about this, I don't want to use jargon that we don't all follow. Vision and mission, they tend to be or should be kind of short statements that give everybody a shared purpose and a shared North Star, right? Something that we're all guiding to. The way I like to break it down is your vision is the world that you want to live in, and your mission is how you get to that place, right? So your vision might be, everybody wearing, Nike sweatshirts and loving them. And so your mission is to make the best sweatshirt you possibly can and make sure that that it appeals to a huge group of people, right? So that's kind of vision mission a little bit. Having a clear vision and mission, if you haven't articulated one, doing so, or if it's super long, a paragraph or more, something people can't remember, you probably want to shorten that and make it something that people can grasp out on, because vision and mission isn't a box that you check when you're talking about internal branding. It's something that you want your employees to be able to remember and articulate, and most importantly, see themselves reflected in. People need to understand how what they do adds up to something larger than themselves, right? I'm not just coming to work for the paycheck. I'm coming to work because my job matters. Is the difference between putting together so-so work, showing up at 9, leaving at 5, maybe 4:30, and keeping your eye on the horizon for new jobs, versus being engaged and excited about coming into work, taking real quality and pride in what you do, and appreciating the work that maybe you're not even doing, but that's happening around you. Getting your vision and mission right really helps to turn your employees into brand ambassadors. And that's huge. And it's not just about employee pride, right, Dustin?
No, and I think that's definitely a big piece of it, because like when we talk about, employees having pride in the work and pride in the organization that they're representing, it affects every little aspect outside of that. It's going to make a better product. It's going to provide a better service. It's going to make, better sales if that's part of the goals and that's the kind of organization you're a part of. So when we kind of think about that, right? Like what is, how do you get that pride in work? How do you kind of get that kind of alignment going beyond that vision and mission? It's really, we're talking about values. We're talking about what resonates with the organization as a whole and, the employees themselves. Because, when you have employees that are resonating with the brand itself, they work harder, they sell better, and they recruit more effectively. They refer to people, they refer better people, more appropriate people, better workers. So you want to have that well established for this kind of thing, because when we're thinking about internal branding, right, like we've all been there. We've worked for a business that we like the product and we want people to actually buy it. Like you would buy that product because even though you work there. That is a huge that's a huge thing, when you're building that brand ambassador. But yeah. So
well, what I was going to say also is you have a frontline check on service and quality. That's something that we put here on the slide, and I think it's important too, right? Because now all of a sudden you don't need to rely on one quality check or a manager going in to make sure people did their jobs well. You're able to trust one another, trust everybody to kind of police one another, in the best possible way, hold each other accountable to that high quality that you're looking for, whether that's in culture and conversations you're having or products you're creating. And, I want to stop and see, have we seen, among the group, kind of a question for everybody. Have y'all seen times where there's been a misalignment or a lack of a shared vision being a problem, either in places you've worked or clients you've had? I'd love to hear cases where you've kind of run into this not working as intended, or maybe places where you've seen it being improved and it really stood out. I'm curious how people feel about that.
Paul is happy to share his thoughts. Paul, jump right in. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, hey, thanks. What I'm hearing is a lot of conversation focused around employees, and I want to bring a different perspective to it, which is nonprofit leadership, with the commonality there being whether it's a board member or an employee, we're talking about the same thing because we want to create a brand ambassador. And in the case of a board member, they're not even getting paid. In fact, not only are they expected to show up for free, but make a yearly contribution to the organization. So they really need to be invested. I've met with Dustin about a nonprofit who shall remain unnamed that we're considering a rebrand, and the ins and outs of how that would work, how to get buy-in and how to get that process started, because I've been through this before with other organizations and I see the benefit. I'm just hoping to convince other board members of the value of going through the process.
I mean, I think what you're articulating is a really, it's a bit of a rat's nest because board management is always so challenging, right? You're trying to manage people in an environment where the power dynamics are inherently against you, right? You know, it's hard to manage folks who can tell you what to do and also can rapidly pull significant amount of money away or shift it around. But the other thing that's interesting in what you're talking about is, you know, when we're talking about cause-driven organizations, it's a little bit different. And I say cause-driven as opposed to nonprofit because, you know, it's a broader set, but it speaks to an ideology there where it almost feels like I already paid at the office. You know what I mean? I'm here because I care about a cause, because animal abuse or women's rights or whatever it is the reason why we're here. And so I already have the right culture. I'm already here with the right attitude or the right approach. And that's not necessarily the case. I think we've all been plenty of places where a shared sense of belonging doesn't necessarily equal a shared sense of community and a shared accountability. With board members, I'm curious what other people have to think too about this, but with board members, for me, I think it's really up to the principal to be able to telegraph that. It's the closest that you get to equality in power on the board is to have the president or the CEO be able to sort of telegraph and hold the board members accountable, and ideally find some of those board leaders, whether they're the chairman or whether they're just highly involved, well-respected members of the board. Emeritus is great there, or emeritus is great for these purposes, to try to get other board members to commit and stay engaged in a culture that they're not in every single day. And that's the other disadvantage there is you can't kind of keep that steady beating drum of this is our culture, this is who we are, this is what our brand is, this is how we talk about ourselves, when you only have a board meeting on a quarterly basis. So keeping that board communication up and making sure you've got leadership on the board are two, I think, not easy ways, but effective ways of trying to get board members to sort of recognize what that internal branding is, live up to that, and then ideally model it for other people. Then again, maybe I'm blowing smoke, Paul. Do you think does that resonate with you?
Nope, every word resonates completely. In the case of this organization, it's compounded slightly by what I'll refer to as founders syndrome, where someone has been invested for a really long time. They're not tech savvy. They don't really understand the value in the brand or a rebrand. And even if we were to stick with a current logo, there's nothing cohesive throughout any form of media or collateral. So I'm just trying to lead by example and show them what other partner organizations have done, especially when it comes to rebranding and consistency. So I'm just hoping that the other board members will understand that, see the value in it, and help move the process forward.
Yeah, and founder syndrome, I think, really resonates too. I saw a bunch of nodding heads. Does anybody want to touch base on internal branding and founder syndrome for a second? I'm sure everybody could riff on it like a jazz band, but I'm curious if anybody wants to share something.
Hey, Nick,
almost 8 years ago, I saw the writing on the wall, and while I probably could have stayed, I chose to leave a company because the founder syndrome was so bad. And long story short, we had taken this company from in the red to in the black, and so our sandbox became more attractive. People wanted to play in it, It's a long established brand. So when it started doing good, they wanted in and just started reworking the whole thing to the point where it created confusion with long established internal and external branding. But there was no shaking that founder off this course. So see ya. But that is an extremely frustrating and powerful thing to have to deal with when you're doing internal marketing. So I don't envy you one bit in that challenge. Good luck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It-
And yeah, and I think that, both of those examples kind of also, as we talk about internal branding, right? We don't just talk about that. It's just not just something from the top down, but it is, it is fully cohesive throughout the entire organization. Everybody is affected by that internal branding, conversation and the aspects that come from it.
And Luke is definitely
And-
someone who really good at internal branding.
Yeah.
Well,
I try.
and the case that you bring up, Luke, I think transitions nicely to kind of the next scenario we're talking about, which is really recruitment retention issues. We're looking at these. You can see these titles are kind of based on folks who are running a company like this. But God, I don't think you can throw a rock in Maine without hitting somebody who's complaining about not having the right people or the right number of people for the jobs that are open right now. I mean, it's a national thing, as we all know. I think it's a little bit more acute here in Maine for a variety of different reasons, demographics, economy, etc. But recruitment and retention are a huge issue, and both of these are sort of addressed silver bullet style with really effective internal branding. But it also makes you have to confront a couple issues, right? One thing that I want to start off with first is the recruitment side of things. I hate to lean on stats. I feel like the line, what stats are just another way of lying, can sometimes be very true. But there's a stat that I think resonates with a lot of the experiences that we've run into, and that's 86% of millennials would be willing to take a pay cut if they were working at a company that aligned with their values. I don't know if that's inflated, but I think that there's truth in that space, which is to say that people will stay places that they feel that they belong in, and people are more likely to move to places that they feel are representational of who they imagine themselves to be, right? There's a self-actualization connected to this. And we're going to talk a little bit more in another webinar about how we message to Millennial and Gen Z, because I know that's a huge pain point for a lot of people, and it's something that folks are still trying to figure out in a lot of different ways. So I'm not going to dive too deeply into that, but spoiler alert, your brand values are a huge part of recruiting a younger generation of employees. And that's part of the reason why a lot of the recruitment efforts that we have really rely on is we start by asking, what is it like to work at your company? What is it like engaging on a day-to-day basis? What does your turnover look like? What are the complaints coming from people before they leave? Because in most cases, we can kind of smell when an employee might be thinking about walking out the door before they do, right? Or you can see when a manager's pretty checked out. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the company or the organization is suggesting values or a mission or a vision that they have that they're not upholding internally. It might be that externally it's a disconnect. It's kind of, Walt Disney needs to make sure that their employees and their Imagineers feel like they're working at Walt Disney. Because if they don't, there's a sense of hypocrisy there that can really take down your whole brand. And it really rots from the core. And that kind of goes to the retention issue a little bit too here, is that hypocrisy is something that'll really take you down if your internal brand doesn't live up to the vision, missions, values that you have, or if when you're doing your own rebrand and you're talking internally about that rebrand, that you're not being honest or realistic with yourself about what your brand can be. And this is something that we deal with a lot, and sometimes is an uncomfortable conversation to have, particularly when we're talking to founders of organizations who are trying to understand how to improve retention, or they want to move in a different direction. Is promising that you're going to be committed to openness, reliability, ingenuity, innovation. Like, these are all wonderful things to say you're going to do, but are you really committed to innovation? Are you really the kind of management that's open to hearing solutions from any level? Or are you somebody that's really only going to listen to recommendations coming from somebody with 10 or more years of experience or somebody who's a deputy director? Like, do you really listen to every employee? I'm not saying you need to, but I'm saying if you don't, you shouldn't pretend that you do. Because then what you're doing is you're just setting up everybody's expectations for a relationship that you can't manage or build. It's like lying on a first date and then having to pretend that you did used to be the Pope for the rest of your marriage. Hard thing to do, guys. So that's something that we want to address here, is kind of building trust with your employees and making sure that you stay consistent with those values that you're trying to reflect. You know, and something that we get asked a lot, but I'd like to hear some thoughts from y'all. You know, how do you demonstrate your values to your employees or to your coworkers? How does a good company do it? How should they do it? Any examples of times when you've kind of taken a look at it and said, this is really great. I feel like I belong here. I feel like they're getting it right.
And don't be shy, jump right in, because I feel like we have some good attendees for this question. We have some organizations that are doing this really well on this webinar. So if anyone wants to jump in.
Hi, my name's Riley. And I work at Bangor Savings Bank, and one of I feel like our values as a bank is like kind of like community and gratitude. And one of the ways I feel like the bank really genuinely like kind of supports that is they have an initiative that might happen like once a year called Be Kind, that they give employees cash to give away to charities, their neighbors, really anywhere in their communities where they see that there might be a need. And so it's just like, you know, the recipient doesn't need to like follow us or like anything, like there's no kind of like catch to it. It's just kind of like a nice way to give money back. So I really like that. I feel like that's one of the things that we do that helps support like our culture and our values.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and those grand gestures are you know, important, right? It shows that they've got skin in the game. You know, I think a lot of people are community oriented too.
I had to print off a visual, but one of the things that we did was make a document that we have a big poster in the hallway. We have staff that range from salaried employees to hourly warehouse to overnight crew. So all different types of individuals. And we wanted something that could outline our internal brand and be easily understood by all those different levels, and also be able to be regurgitated in such a way that the people we interact with, our customers, could appreciate that as well. One of the underlying pieces of that was creating a brand mantra, so different than our tagline, and it gave us something internal to rally around that really helped underscore what everything was doing. And the three things I'm really proud of in this, we have our traditional mission, vision, and positioning statement, but I also made statements for a rational, emotional, and cultural qualities for the brand, so that people understood from a mental standpoint why and how we were doing these things, from a community standpoint how we fit in, and from an emotional standpoint. So it takes something that could be a long, boring read about our mission and we were founded on this and that, and it turned it into a sentence, right? And then that turned into a mantra. So by making it a little bit more digestible, we're able to get everybody to kind of buy in and understand it.
100%. Did you find people repeating that mantra kind of unironically after a while? People were buying into it and
100%. Yep.
I feel like that's the biggest challenge, is kind of breaking through the kind of like cynical barrier that a lot of people have, particularly if they've been around an office for a long time, and try to break through and get them to start really embracing these things.
Yeah.
Has anybody else had good luck, or as part of a community that, you know, on a daily basis, you kind of find true believers, people in the office who really do kind of repeat some of those values? I saw your head shake, Sarah.
It's tough. We are at this point moving so fast, and we've grown in the year that I've been here, we have doubled our size. So in the market that I'm in, engineering and surveying and all that land development, our surveys have been backed up for 6 months. So I had to kind of come up with branding. They didn't have a marketing position before me. So I've taken on a bunch of hats. So I'm also the recruiting, and what I've been given is kind of a blueprint of what I'm looking for. And what I do with that is the people that we're trying to get more millennials up here too. And for us, like you in Maine, we're up here in the mountains. So demographically, it's a challenge, but getting my employees to feel that our mission is to be as flexible as we can for our clients, and you know that we can jump when they say jump, has been difficult because everybody is just so overburdened right now. And so I do the birthday greetings. I try and be the most cheerful. So I don't know if that's helping, but I have added like 6 staff in the last 2 months. So that's
Yeah.
something at least.
Sarah, how large is your organization?
We've got 65, and they run from technical engineers, surveyors. So we've got licensed people. We also have CAD drafters, and we've got a support staff of maybe 5. So we're really busy.
Yeah,
It sounds it.
Yeah, it's great because when I was able to actually say, all right, we're going to do a company-wide thing. They hadn't gotten together for close to the 2 years through the pandemic. We did a big dinner after the holidays were over and showed everybody just how much we appreciated it. Got to meet people that none of us had met, but we all still have that open door policy. So, you know, it's just a matter of getting these people to give me that extra time, because nobody seems to have the time.
Yeah, and trying to manage it through that transition, that growth transition is so challenging too, because you know those values of like we're responsive and we're agile, they're kind of OBE'd by that growth. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah, and you certainly don't have the time to rebrand in the middle of what is a sprint up this mountain, right?
Yeah, and
But in
literally,
yeah.
we do a lot of ski areas, so you know we're working on some of these really big ones, and they want to get everything done before the ski season hits. So schedules are a problem, and having the supply chain affect us, because down the line it's going to affect us. But I like the brand when I signed on, and I'm just trying to push more of it on everybody so that they understand who we are, because I think a lot of our new people really they didn't know what we're really trying to represent. So getting that out there has been kind of a challenge, but it's working. So
well, and brand, like internal branding it's a little bit like a holy scripture too, you know what I mean? Like it comes down from on high, and there's a little bit of interpretation that needs to happen in times like these, you know what I mean? So maybe you've become the Methodist version of your internal branding, you know?
Yes.
Trying to find how you can turn the where responsive to where reliable, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely an interesting place to be.
And to let our technical staff know that they've got open doors, you know, and that's we are just as flexible as they're supposed to be. So trying to get that through to the heads of you know the big heads, that's kind of difficult, because you know they're in between 8 offices across 3 states, and they're busy. So
Yeah, no, and I think that, you know, that kind of lends to what we sort of built out in scenario 3, as we kind of like think about, you know, I'm going to rebrand it all. We thought a little bit about, you know, what it's like when you have to make a large pivot in company direction. And especially when we find ourselves right in moments of giant growth, or really, moving into a different direction by all these different factors that have happened over the last couple of years. So we found that this scenario really resonates with people, and we're talking about, what other ways internal branding really can make that can really help shape something for an organization. And really, when we think about this, right, you got to brand from the inside out. Whenever you have those changes, and especially you're thinking like, how is this going to affect things externally as we need to change ourselves? It all starts from inside. And you really need to make sure that you have that, you're ensuring your alignment at those different levels, from those stakeholders, from those board members, right, all the way down to the vast differing levels of employees buying in, to making sure that you're going to have that resonance across everything. You need to make people feel heard. You need to be able to listen, and you need to be able to make sure that, when you're making those changes, people understand why you're making those changes. Luke, I think your example of showing all of those different reasons behind what does this brand represent is important, because for whatever reason they're going to be approaching it that day, they're going to realize it from the emotional side, from the business side, from this side. So it's important to make sure when we're looking at, when a company is making those changes, that you're able to feel heard and have that kind of resonate. And then you need to really think about your internal branding and how it has to have a strategy. It has to have a framework. You're making a change, things are broadly changing. You need to be able to address where you're going to be going, and understand people's tolerance for change, and knowing that that's going to be a challenge that you'll have to overcome. Internal branding really needs to be that foundation. So you're getting everybody together, before you have your external branding. So before you can even communicate to your vendors, to your clients, to potential new prospects or buyers, you have to have everybody on the inside really understand the changes first, or, it can be an absolute catastrophe. I was just say, Sarah's got the very big nods on that one.
I'm still fighting with one of our new acquisitions to use our brand. They're still using their old brand on stuff. Stop.
Yeah, there's
Different letterhead, people.
Huge changes when they have to make a big change. We've worked with quite a few businesses lately that have acquired other businesses or smaller businesses, or it's sort of done their own sub departments, and it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge to be able to make alignment between two companies, and that's a whole nother webinar. Right, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting too, because at least increasingly we're seeing, younger companies that are really interested in growing really rapidly, and then acquiring kind of older legacy companies where maybe the owner is retiring, or maybe, the owner's spouse took over management for a while and really kind of can't and passes it on. And so a lot of the rebrands that we're dealing with have been scenarios where you've got one company that brings on another one, but that other company, potentially smaller company, has got employees that have been there 20 years. So they have a really clear sense of who they are. Maybe they haven't articulated that, but they know what this company is. They know what this company's purpose is. They know how they treat their employees, and how they treat their customers. And it's really important that as you're doing this kind of, like Dustin says, this rebrand externally, that you're not leaving your employees behind internally when you do that. Have folks run into that? Have you run into any places where the company's got a brand new brand, and folks haven't signed on, they're not on board, maybe they're just resentful because they feel like they weren't part of that rebranding process, or maybe that new brand that came in just doesn't feel like who they are, it doesn't resonate with them? Anybody kind of run into that, either personally or with a client?
I know I certainly have over the years of agency work. It's something we run into again and again. Commonly, sometimes it's an organization with multiple offices, and one office is completely on board, but the other division, is still using the old branding materials, isn't as on board as sort of the mothership corporate office.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one I always like to think of when we kind of look over this, and people probably heard it on other webinars because I just love bringing it up, is like JCPenney in 2012 is a good example of like leaving your employees behind and having it be a major upset. One of the things that that they clearly did is that they did not listen to their internal audiences. So when they had their brand rollout and they did, when they were at essentially the point where it needed to be external, they they didn't equip their people. They didn't equip management. They didn't equip middle management. They didn't equip, the standard employee working the floor with all the tools and equipment to be able to do that. And so when, one day all the new marketing materials showed up and the word sale was illegal, like it was very, it was a bit sort of a betrayal for those employees, and it had a lot of damaging effects, which JCPenney still today has not fully recovered from.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of leads us into a couple of key considerations, because we've kind of gone through some scenarios, and we want to wrap up with 3 things that we think are really important to keep in mind when you're doing any kind of internal rebrand. You can see here we've got timing, tailoring, and execution. And I want to speak to timing first, which is that it's not always a good time to rebrand. Unless you want to do a rebrand with Anania Bailey, in which case right now is the perfect time and you should do it. It's important to think about, is a rebrand right now, either a soft refresh or a full rebrand. Is this allowing us to be more competitive in the environment that we're in, right? Externally, do we need to do a rebrand for that? Do we need to pause and refresh just how much we've evolved a little bit? It might not be a question of we're not competitive, but more a question of we've become something different, a little bit to kind of what you're saying, Sarah, with this kind of rapid growth you have. Culture's probably changing unintentionally underneath the feet of everyone right now. And in another 2 or 3 years, you're probably going to find that who you thought you were isn't who you are anymore. Maybe for the best, hopefully for the best.
Right.
But understanding that and thinking about that timing is really important. But another thing that we like to talk about a lot is there a tolerance for change? Leadership, and this is something that I talk about a lot. This is the kind of the bully pulpit I get on sometimes. Is it feels like leadership is really the national resource that we have the greatest shortage of. And I think that we see that and feel that on teams that we're on that don't work the way we want to, or people that we're trying to collaborate with or partner with in our own organizations, or others that just don't work out well. It's really, and then obviously nationally, we don't even need to get into it, but leadership is really something that we struggle with. And as a result, there's a lot of leadership changes that happen at organizations fairly rapidly. It's like a bad quarterback in the NFL. You end up getting 3 or 4 in a row before you get one that sticks. And if you're thinking about how you want to change and rebrand, you need to consider how much change and disruption has your company already dealt with. Is there a chance for that? Did the founder recently pass away and now you've got a new president? Is now the time that you also want to do this rebrand, right? We're all coming out of COVID and then we're walking into a recession. Is now the time that people are going to feel safe? Because even if you're rebranding for the best, and even if you go about it in all the right ways, you might be starting at a disadvantage if people inherently just don't have the energy to be part of it, right? Or are fundamentally afraid of it. And at the end of the day, everybody's afraid of change. Everybody is, whether we want to admit it or not. On some level, that makes us all feel a little insecure. And that's something that you need to address when you're talking about it. So that kind of speaks a little bit to timing, but also I think transitions a little bit to how you tailor those messages to those teams too, right, Dustin?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I constantly think about when we're talking about internal branding, right, is that internal messaging to your team. It's critical. You really need to make sure that, when we've talked so much about alignment, that you got to have that shared messaging, and you need to have that targeted buy-in, but that like we said, right, stakeholders and board members and employees and management and middle management. Like, we need to have those kind of buy-ins, and you need to make sure that there is something that everyone feels representative of the change that you're making, whether it's a small, policy change, or whether it's a full rebrand, or, you are just, having some internal communication kind of things to just get everybody on the same, on the same playing field. So there's so much that needs to be tailored in those kind of things. And you need to make sure that there's a variability to the messaging. Like, everybody needs to see themselves reflected in how you're talking about it, and talking to your board member is not going to be the same thing as talking to an employee, or talking, to a vendor, talking to a contractor that's a part of it. So like, you need to know how you're going to be providing that messaging, and you need to have that strategy, those touch points. You need to know that it's not just a one-time party. It is daily interactions, and making sure you have those touch points along the way, that this is going to be effective. And just because you've done it once, with your organization, or you've had some sort of internal branding or strategic branding, sort of strategic retreat kind of approach before, does not mean that you have you don't have the template, that you don't have the full thing for where your organization is right now. Because a good example is just, doing a rebrand right 4 years ago was pre-COVID. Now a lot of businesses, a lot of organizations have had to change and think about how they've changed as an organization in that short amount of time. So there's no standardized kind of thing about it. There's really just the hard work of jumping in and trying to make sure that it is going to be tailored to each of these things. And that's what leads to, execution.
Yeah, I mean, getting the right philosophy and tailoring your message is really only half the deal. At the end of the day, as it is with all projects, you need to be able to deliver on this stuff, right? And that, when we talk about delivering internal branding, we're talking about, materials and messages alongside the timing to make it work. And, those are, it's conversations and listening sessions internally, right? It's a brand culture guide. It's updated visual vision, missions, values. And sometimes that means posters and brochures. Sometimes it just means good conversations. But this really needs to be executed with a team that's committed to doing that. And that can be an internal committee. It can be an agency like ours. It can be both. But you really do need to make sure that when you decide you're going to start doing this, that you commit to following it all the way through, because you really aren't going to get a second chance on an internal rebrand like this. If you try, and we've got an example that we chose not to bring up here for a variety of different reasons, but they're kind of the perfect example of trying to do an internal rebrand, kind of just failing at it sort of miserably, kind of making a lot of the wrong reads about your people, kind of misaligning your messaging with the kind of people that you're trying to speak to and the values that they have. And then, they came to us and said, hey, we need help. We need a second chance at this internal rebrand. And it's really hard to start there, because you've already hurt your reputation, right? It already feels like a bit of a betrayal. It's hard to come back from losing trust like that. It's hard to keep a relationship going after an affair, which is a little bit like what this is when you have a failed internal rebrand effort, right? It leaves a bad taste in your mouth. It makes your both kind of your employees at all levels really question your judgment and question your commitment and question your understanding of who they are. So really, if you're not sure what you're doing, if you're tentative about how you want to approach this, or you feel like I think I might have a read here, but I probably need to do a little bit more research, ask more questions. If you don't know what you're doing, ask for help, because the stakes are high.
Yeah, indeed. All right.
Well,
So
Dustin and Nick, that was fantastic. And I see we have someone's hand raised. Paul, I'm going to have you come on in one second. But don't be, I just put this in chat. Don't be shy. We have a couple minutes left. We try to keep these a little bit shorter, a little bit light, because it's a Friday. So throw it in the chat. If you have a question right now, throw it into chat. And Paul, did you have something to say? Did you want to come on?
Yeah, so when considering rebrand, would you consider looking at competitors, peer groups as a good benchmark to use as a comparison?
Yes and no. I mean, there's value there and you need to, right? Like you shouldn't, you need to understand how you're positioned with your competition and to kind of make sure that your assumption about where you are in that ecosystem is right. But as far as modeling it after, I would be really cautious there because not a lot of people get this stuff right. And there's always the risk of copying your neighbor's homework is that they didn't do the reading either. What I would say is, you know, part of any rebrand is, that discovery period that you're talking about. But as far as trying to decide where you want to be and how you want to position yourself, a lot of it is kind of that internal listening, figuring out where your people are at, what their appetite is, what they need. And I think it's also taking a look at other organizations that you admire or even other leaders, CEOs that you feel are a good representation of who you are, right? If for some reason you're part of the cult of Elon, great. That doesn't necessarily mean that you want to model yourself after an Elon Musk or after a Tesla for any number of reasons, including, is it the right cultural fit? Is this something that's genuine and a good reflection of you? It's kind of like watching somebody wear an ill-fitted fedora. Indiana Jones looks great, but like not everybody looks great in a fedora, right? So I think it's important to take a look at the cultures that have influenced who you are, influenced kind of where your community of employees and managers are, and trying to think about how you want to model yourself there in relation to that competition, right? Because it's not just about making sure it's right; it's also making sure that it stands out. So.
Yeah, and I one thing that I think it really resonates with that too is that no two brands are the same. So there's never going to be like a one-to-one comparison of like we did it exactly like they did, and you know, like it should have worked. Like each one of those, like you find that in the discovery process that it changes, even so ever so slightly, it'll change it, and your error will go off the mark.
Yeah, definitely not considering modeling other organizations, just using what other organizations have done as a way of influencing this founder to convince them that we indeed would benefit greatly from looking at this.
Yeah, trying to manage up and kind of convince people can be really difficult here. I always find that the easiest one, it's you know, the first one's free, man. Come on, is like try to encourage them just to have a conversation with somebody outside, you know, and whether that's like, you know, a conversation with an agency, sure, maybe, but it might also feel a little salesy. Maybe that's not what you want to do. Maybe it's a conversation with a peer of theirs, you know, another person in the community who has run their own company or founded their own company for a long time, that can speak to the value there. You know what I mean? You're not looking to sell an idea. You're just looking to validate the concept, you know, and so that's where I think you turn to your own network and see if you can find people who can speak to that.
Indeed. Do we have any other questions?
Well, it's obviously something that we love talking about, and it comes through with Dustin and Nick. Thank you guys so much. This is a great presentation. And thanks to Riley, Paul, Luke, Sarah for coming on. It was great to hear from you. Luke, I'd love for you to send me that sheet. I'd love to get a copy of that.
I bet you would.
But just you know, thanks everyone for attending. Dustin, he's our account executive. You want to continue the conversation? We got his email, Dustin with a Y at ananiabailey.com. Make sure to follow us on social, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And be lookout for the next one. We do one of these every month. So Nick mentioned marketing to Gen Z, something we're working on, and we're also doing some more branding webinars and some more campaign focused webinars. So would love to have you all there, and thank you so much for coming.
Indeed. Everybody enjoy your weekend.